Hello, it's Gary here. Just a short video to present you with a method by which you can easily remember and recall the 5 exact trig ratios that you might need in the upcoming GCSE exams. In particular, paper 1, which is non-calculator, on both the foundation and the higher tiers, has got a requirement for you to use the exact trig ratios for the 5 angles shown on the screen. So it might be worth pausing this just for a couple of seconds while you fetch a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper so that you can work through this with me. If you watch it, it's probably less likely that you'll remember it, whereas if you maybe watch it through once, I guess, but then watch it through again and write out the table and then try and do the table on your own with the video closed. And maybe try it a few more times, particularly the night before or maybe even in the morning before paper 1, which is, as I said earlier, the non-calculator paper. So in the hope that you've now got a pen and a piece of paper, I'll move on to a blank page and I'll show you how you can create a table that can be quite useful. So the first thing I want you to do is on the left hand side, I want you to write the word ratio. And then working from left to right, we're going to write down those 5 key angles. So 0 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and 90 degrees. And then we're going to write down the first of those ratios, which is sine, on the left-hand side below the word ratio. Okay, now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be filling in kind of this area here with some ratios that link in with the angles that are listed above them. So firstly, I want you to go along and quite simply draw 5 fraction lines. Okay, and then in the denominator of those fractions, write the word 2. So all these ratios are going to be fractions over the number 2. Well, they are initially, but we're going to simplify them. Okay, so firstly, 0 degrees, which is going to be this fraction. I want you to write 0, with a square root around it. And then we're going to work all the way across here in ascending order, numbers 1 to 4 with square roots around them. So square root 1, square root 2, square root 3, square root 4. Okay? Now, you can just use those ratios if you wish, and that might be the most straightforward. But if you want to simplify them, because you might be asked to do so in a question, then let's write out another line, okay, which we're going to call sine as well, because it's the same ratio. But simplifying. So the first thing we've got is the square root of 0. Now the square root of 0 is 0, and then 0 divided by anything is still 0. So that first fraction just becomes 0. The second one, the square root of 1, is 1. So that second one for 30 degrees just becomes a half. Okay, so just so you know how to express this as we're going along, the sine of 0 degrees is 0. Then the sine of 30 degrees is a half. Okay, so you've got the ratios as you go. So moving on to 45 degrees, we can leave that as the square root of 2 over 2. And the same for 60 degrees, which is the square root of 3 over 2. The final one in the list is 90 degrees, and the square root of 4 is 2, and then 2 divided by 2 is just 1. So that final ratio just becomes 1. Okay? So what we can do if you want is you can put a border around that second line because they are the simplified ratios for sine. Now, that's all you really need to remember because everything else is going to be based on that line for sine. So cos, which is the next ratio in the list, is simply the sine ratios in reverse. So rather than start with 0 and end with 1, we're going to start with 1 and end in 0. So effectively, it's just writing that list backwards. So cos of 0 degrees is 1. Cos of 30 degrees is root 3 over 2. Cos of 45 degrees is the same because it's an odd number of values, so the one in the middle doesn't change. The cos of 30 degrees is a half, and the cos of 90 degrees is 0. So we don't need to simplify those because they're already in their simplest form. So we can just put a border around those as our exact ratios for cos. Okay. Tan is simply the sine ratio divided by the cos ratio. So we can write that without worrying about simplification to start with by just doing 0 over 1. We can then do the same for this one over this one. So the tan of 30 degrees is a half divided by root 3 over 2. The tan of 45 degrees is root 2 over 2 divided by root 2 over 2. And then finally, the tan of 60 degrees is root 3 over 2 divided by a half. And just a reminder, I'm just doing that one divided by that one and putting them both here. And finally, we've got 1 divided by 0. So the tan of 90 degrees is 1 divided by 0. Okay. Now we can do some simplification. So I'll write the word tan again. Let me just drag the screen up to give me a bit of space. So tan of 0 degrees is just the simplification of this. So 0 divided by 1 is 0. The next one, look, if we look at these denominators, they're the same. So they can just be cancelled. So cancel that, cancel that. So that leaves us with 1 over root 3. This is an interesting one next. Root 2 over 2 divided by root 2 over 2. So the numerator and the denominator are the same. And when you have that situation, 1 divided by the other just gives you 1. Anything divided by itself is 1. The fourth, we've got the common denominators of 2, so we can just cancel those through, and we can write that as root 3 over 2. And finally, the fifth one, 1 divided by 0, anything divided by 0 is actually infinity. So we can write that as non-applicable in this particular case. Okay, we've got our final simplified version for tan. Oops, let's just make that a little bit shorter so I can put that in a summary rectangle. And there you've got the table, if you want, for the exact ratios for sine, cos and tan. Just remember, the only thing you really needed to remember was this line here, because everything else is either a simplification or a modification of that line. Okay, so why don't you work through this video again, possibly writing out the table as you go if you haven't done so already. Then close down the video and try and do it just from memory, possibly referring back to the video when needed, and then practice that a few more times just to make sure it fully embeds. Okay, hope that's useful. I can almost guarantee that something will come up with regards to exact trig ratios on paper 1. So it's worth, trying to spend a little bit of time doing it. Of course, the alternative is to simply remember these 3 lines. So you don't have to write the table and work it all out. If you remember those 15 values, if you've got the ability to do so, then that will be even quicker. And just as a final thing, if you really are struggling, what you could do is you could have those 15 values there written down on a piece of paper, which you keep with you right up until before you go into the exam. Okay, so when you're in the queue, before you put your bags down, keep looking at them. Then obviously when it's time to go in for the exam, you'll have to put that piece of paper in your bag, walk to your desk, and when they say that you're able to start the exam, you can turn over the piece of your exam paper and write those ratios immediately on the back. So that means that you're only really holding them in your memory for a few minutes, from when you're in the queue until when the exam starts. And then when you get to that particular question, you can flip over to where you've made a note, and hopefully all will be well, and you can gain yourself a few marks just by using those ratios correctly. Anyway, good luck.